for your clients, and also how I am leveraging it inside of my agency and inside of a lot of others are a voice AI for developers, like it says here as well on the page. They allow you to create those kind of voice-based AI assistants on an infrastructure, like the bare minimum you can imagine for making voice here, and log into it. So I already did that. And when entering Vapi, you can see an assistant tab, and you can create an assistant, which I already did here, with a template for the appointment setter here, which then brings in a dental template. So this is an example of a static assistant because you basically create it on the platform. You can define your prompting, you can choose transcribers, basically the voice to text, text to voice. In both of those options, you can set some extra functions, so basically extra features and tools that assistant should have access to while communicating with the user. And you have some more advanced settings that I'm not going to go into right now. But what that basically means is that this assistant is a static assistant. It always works exactly with the information that you put into here. So, which is usually okay if you, like I mentioned, have a very simple setup. You don't need a lot of customizations, then this makes definitely a lot of sense. But in case you, for example, have a user base behind it and you would like to customize the prompt depending on the user you're interacting with or the actual caller that is currently calling, then these transient-based assistants are a lot more interesting. So those transient-based assistants are not configured in here because basically they don't exist until the point the call actually comes in. So to actually demonstrate that to you, I'm going to try my best drawing skills ever for actually explaining it to you visually. So let's just get a better understanding of the static assistants. So I'm literally just gonna create a little screen here. We say static assistants, and let's now say we are going to have a phone call. Now we have a phone here, and what happens when a phone call comes in, for example, Vapi then basically sends an information to the Vapi server, which then basically takes care of all of the information within Vapi, right? So Vapi basically then validates all of the information, it runs the telephony, etc. And it exactly uses the assistant that is also saved on their server to return the information back to the caller. So all that happens in that case is literally that Vapi just communicates back and forth between the phone caller, is the server, and the phone caller. So there is no other interaction because you basically created the assistant on their platform. So now let's go over and actually get into some transient-based assistants. So for the transient-based assistants, it's nearly the same. So I will definitely try to copy my amazing phone here. I'll put it right over here. And when a phone call comes in now, what happens is that we basically again send a phone call to a server for Vapi. So Vapi basically again accepts that phone call, understands that there's something to do. So they basically set up the phone call logic whatsoever. But now instead of actually returning something to the user, what they're going to do is they request from a different server that can basically be one of yours. So your basically very own server backend, like wherever you host that, or even a no-code solution like make.com. And it basically asks this server, what is the assistant you want to use? You can now imagine that it basically sends a request to your very own server, where you can then create an assistant by yourself. Now, instead of creating the stuff statically on Vapi, all you would do is you would have your own server where you basically create the assistant configuration. And the way that works is by using JSON constructs. So if we are going to head over to Vapi and we actually go to their documentation, you can see inside of their documentation under API reference and create assistant, you can see the possibility of creating an assistant which would do it statically in the backend. So we don't want to do that, but you can see that it's done by a massive JSON construct right here, which is literally just a structured definition of that whole assistant that you would have basically created within the backend, but now in a structured way and a simple string. So this information is basically everything that you just created inside of the backend of Vapi, but that you have it inside of a string. So all we would do now is we would basically have our own server send back to Vapi this string of the Vapi assistant that we created, and then this string is basically used by Vapi to set up the phone call and actually configure that phone call based on your settings, and then Vapi starts communicating back to the caller. So now if we are zooming out, you can see the difference that for a static assistant, you are actually basically setting up the assistant on Vapi, and Vapi directly uses that assistant and sends it back to the phone caller whenever there comes a message in. The difference is now with the transient-based ones that they don't exist until you actually get a phone call, and then you are basically responsible for creating that assistant and sending that assistant back to Vapi, and Vapi then sets up the phone call, does everything necessary, and then calls back or sends the information back to the caller to interact with it. This is like a brief picture, and now you might ask yourself, how does that actually work inside of Vapi? And they have definitely an extensive documentation, so I definitely suggest to check it out. But to get you started, where you probably want to take a look at is in the documentations under the server URL, because that describes a lot of these features. Once you create a phone number, which you can do within the Vapi dashboard by going to phone numbers, you will be able to buy a phone number or import a phone number, which you can do again from Twilio or Vonage. I usually use Twilio. Then you basically have the phone number inside of Vapi, so Vapi knows about it and can use that phone number to interact with it, etc. If we are now heading to the account, so once you're at the account page, you can see that you can set a server URL and a server URL secret, which is then basically the URL that you would set from within your very own server. So it's like an endpoint from that server that can basically accept information from Vapi and then return something in whatever their, based on whatever their request is. So if we are now looking into their documentation, you can see under the server URL that they also have something called retrieving assistant, which is exactly their main thing, where I think their whole power lies in, and where their whole advantage lays in the AI voice industry at the moment. Whenever a phone call comes in, and that is basically for inbound phone calls, they are requesting information from the server URL that you set up inside of your account. And it is definitely important to make sure that you don't have any assistant, connected inside of the assistant right here that is basically connected to your phone number. So the phone number should not have any assistant, it should just be empty, because that allows you again allows Vapi to actually fetch a assistant dynamically based on the URL from within your account. Then once Vapi basically receives a phone call, it now sends a request to our very own server that looks something like this. So we have a JSON construct that contains an assistant request. So we basically understand now, Vapi wants us to return an assistant. And it also sends along the call details. So basically everything that they have available from within the call, which means like the phone number, the country of origin, the number it's calling. So you also have access to, you also know which kind of phone number it is actually currently calling in case you have more phone numbers connected. And what you can do then is you can return a JSON that looks something like this with an assistant inside back to Vapi. So this assistant is what I basically mentioned earlier inside of their API documentation. So I'm just going to open it up here. It is basically just a structure that looks something like this, which is literally the whole assistant config. And you can literally just return something like this with the settings that you would like to have inside of the assistant. And then Vapi uses that and actually initiates the call, which is incredibly amazing, because what that allows us to do is to completely build an assistant based on the current phone call. So let's assume you are building up an audience profile and you have the phone number. You can connect that phone number to your CRM or whatever else it's interacting with, where you then have, again, maybe access to more information about that phone number, stuff like what name it is connected to, what email it is connected to, etc. And you can validate that information and basically create a prompt, a system prompt inside of the assistant with extra messaging, maybe even extra language whatsoever, and then send it back to Vapi so that Vapi can initiate a phone call with it. So it is not the same approach like Bland does it, because what you probably have seen within Bland is that they allow you to use dynamic tags. So you can use a tag like double curly brackets now, ending double curly brackets, which would add the current date. No, in that case, your server basically has the possibility and has the power to return whatever it is about the prompt that you would like to customize. So you can build all of this custom variable logic by yourself and send it back to the phone caller. And in my opinion, this is still like mind-blowing, because it brings so much flexibility to this whole setup of Vapi that it allows us to build really, really amazing chatbots. Obviously, there are tons of more features to that. Also things like end of call reports, which is something that you can configure inside of the assistant. So let's, for example, say your phone call ends, right? And you get a transcript. The Vapi server can actually send the transcript to your very own server so that you can process that transcript on your very own server. And like I mentioned earlier, if it's not clear, this very own server can even be a no-code solution like make.com or Zapier, because all it is literally just a URL that you drop in, and then you can start whatever kind of scenarios you can imagine on that platform. So now I'm going to show you a little bit better how that actually works. And to do that, we are heading back into our Vapi dashboard, into the phone numbers. And once you have connected a phone number, that is number one, you don't select any assistant, you simply have the phone number connected. You head into your accounts, you add the server URL and the server secret of whatever application you're dealing with. If it's make.com, you add the make.com webhook URL, for example, and you then add also your make.com, like the secret. And the secret you can then again inside of make.com check within a scenario, filter it if it's the right one, and then just have that extra level of security that no one else basically uses your make.com URL. Once you have done that, your assistant, your voice, your phone number can basically already communicate with Vapi and with make.com because it can request the assistant from there. So all you would need to do is inside of make.com, you would need to set up a scenario where you then return the information from the assistant back to Vapi and then do the call. So now if you want to also receive the transcripts whatsoever, what you would need to do is you would need to set up this server URL and the server secret inside of the assistant. So if we're heading back into the JSON that I showed you earlier from the assistant, we scroll down here, you will see the possibility of adding a server URL and a server secret. So whenever you create this assistant dynamically based on this string, you can set a custom server URL and a custom URL secret that is called whenever there is an interaction on this assistant. What I mean by this is if you head back to our server URL as seen here, you can basically send a custom URL for that assistant, and then this assistant sends back the function calls, for example, end of call reports as seen here. So the end of call reports then contains stuff like the recording URL, contains a summary of the conversation, the transcript, and all of the messages. And by simply defining the server URL here, Vapi would then, whenever the call ends, send that information to the server URL that is connected through the dynamic assistant that you created earlier, and you can again retrieve all of the information from Vapi itself. While that sounds a bit complex, it is hopefully a little bit more clear than it was before, because for me to figure all of that out took definitely a while to get a better understanding of how that actually works and goes well together. So I definitely suggest checking out the manual of how that works and how you can actually set that up. For the sake of this video, I'm going to demonstrate this to you with a little example at the end to make sure you actually get the most out of this. So to actually set it up, we already have connected a phone number. I would basically then start now with a make.com scenario. So all I would do is I would click on create a new scenario. I would select the webhooks integration as a starting point, and I would select custom webhooks, which then again allows us to create a custom webhook. So we just call it Vapi test. I save this. This gives us a dynamic URL. So in this URL, we basically want to use to actually initiate our custom assistant. So to do that is this URL is the one that you would basically then add into your dashboard within Vapi. Once on the account, all you would need to do is you would paste this inside of the server URL. You would set up a custom server URL secret that you just remember yourself. And then you head basically back into your integration, you add another module, and inside of this module, what we are going to do is we simply, for this purpose, add a webhook response that looks something like this. And within the body, we are then defining the assistant. And to do that, what we are going to do is we actually create that assistant. And there's a visual way for doing that in case you don't want to write this whole JSON construct somewhere else. I mean, you can definitely use that inside of a tool like JSON Editor Online. You simply paste it in here and you can customize those values visually. It's a lot easier. If you are using a custom server or setup, you can also dynamically adjust those values within the server, obviously, so you don't need to do this manually. But that is what I mean. You really want to build up a framework on top of Vapi that you can actually integrate with your CRMs, etc. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to do this manually. And what I'm actually going to do is I will use Vapi itself to do that, because if you are going into the body, you will be able to set up values directly within here and they will be adjusted on the right. So if we are setting, for example, a custom server URL, you can see that it sets the server URL here as well. So we would literally just go through all of that, and I'm going to do that with you quickly to get an understanding of what all of those fields actually mean. So for the transcriber, we're gonna use DeepGram because it's literally the best transcriber. There's another one available that I've never used, but DeepGram is great. We're going to use Nova 2, which is their latest model, I think. And for the language, we're obviously going to use EN, which means that whenever we are speaking something, DeepGram basically translates it to English. We don't need to add any keywords. For the models and the messages, we are going to add a system message, which is our master prompt, basically. Sorry, I added this in the content. It obviously needs to be in here. And this is basically where we add our master prompt. So guidelines. I'm just going to add that here. So you would later have something like, you are Adam, you are a property real estate assistant, whatsoever. This is basically what you add into the content. Function calls, we don't need any. Tool calls, we don't need any. Anyways, function calls is deprecated by OpenAI. For the provider, of the voice of the LLM, we're gonna use OpenAI for sure. We are also going to use GPT-4. You can choose what model fits you best. I would also suggest you use GPT 3.5 Turbo because in the calls it doesn't make that much of a difference as of now. The more flexible you keep your prompt, obviously the better it is to have a higher version because it helps with hallucinations. Fallback models you can set as well. We can just set GPT-4 as a fallback model if you want to, which means that in case GPT 3.5 doesn't work properly, it will switch to GPT-4. Semantic caching enabled, we set to false, which basically means it can kind of cache responses based on stuff that happened before. Temperature, we simply leave it at 1. We don't need to have any functions right now, which basically means you can give your bot access to extra functions. The max tokens, we simply set to 250 to keep the responses short, because obviously we don't want to be on the phone forever with a voice AI agent. For the voice that we are going to use, you can use Azure. You can obviously also use a different provider. For now, they set up Azure Voice, so you can also choose something like 11 Labs if you would like. I'm just gonna go with Azure because I used that before. You can select any of those values. You can even select a completely custom one that is open, or like even some multilingual ones that are offered by Azure, so they can respond in different languages. You can set up a speed. I simply set that to 1. You can set up also a forwarding phone number, which means in case you allow your phone agent to transfer calls, you can set a forwarding phone number, and this agent can then basically forward that call to the number that you defined right within here. I'll just do that now with a demo number. You can enable recordings, which basically means the whole conversation will be recorded. We allow it to have a end call. So for the end call, basically means that the assistant can end the call as well in your behalf or in the behalf of the user that is calling. So if the user says something like goodbye, the assistant can end the phone call as well. The dial keypad function we keep on false for now. That is basically if you try to use that assistant to make outbound calls and you call with an actual, I don't know, like a menu that basically requests the assistant to, or you as a user to type something in, the assistant can do that in your behalf as well. HIPAA enable, I would say false, so we can actually track and record all of the information. Then you can set up some client messages and server messages, which I'm not going to do now. Silent, timeout seconds, we just keep that empty for now, which means it will pull the default. Response delay seconds basically also just means how long it takes for the assistant to respond in general. So you can delay that, which basically means it takes a little bit longer and it maybe sounds a little bit more natural. If the assistant is really fast to respond, then it sounds a bit more natural to actually have a slight delay in between. The max duration in seconds, I would always set that, which basically means if you set it to, let's say 180, which means it basically would maximum, the calls would be a maximum of 180 seconds long, so 3 minutes. You can set a background sound as well, which basically means when the voice talks, it will have some office background noise in the call, which also again makes it sound a little bit more normal. You can give the assistant a name, so we just call it Ben for now. You can add multiple forwarding phone numbers that you can define with purposes. So if you have a marketing or HR department, you can forward information to those kind of departments. You can also set a first message, which is the welcoming message. Welcome, and then you can say whatever the name is, or like if you make it dynamic later, we can say something like the name, and then we can define and replace that inside of make.com later. For now, I'll just keep it at welcome, how can I help you? Then voicemail detection enabled, we can set to true for now. It's still sometimes a little bit buggy, but works most of the time, which basically means that when a phone number that you try to call has voicemail, you can basically respond with a bot with a predefined message for that voicemail. Exactly. So that the bot basically can answer that voicemail call and speak something onto their device. Actually, I said this I can keep this for true and say, please call me back. Thank you. Then you can also have an end call message, which I'm not going to do right now. And you can basically define the server URL, what I basically mentioned earlier. In case you would like your assistant later to communicate with a server URL and basically all of the other things to send all of the other information to, like we discussed here, the function calls and the end of call report, you can basically create another make.com scenario, use again the same webhook setup. You can paste in this webhook setup directly within here. And I'm just going to do this for simplicity purposes. So I copy that, use the same URL for this one as well, just for now for testing it. And we can basically just set a secret whatsoever. So obviously this secret and the one that you set up inside of your Vapi account, they need to match. So as you can see here, we have now a properly formatted JSON. So all we're going to do is we copy that part until here, which you can then again use in a tool like JSON Editor Online to validate and see if it's actually a valid JSON. If something would be broken, let's say a comma is missing, you can see that it says it doesn't work and you can even auto repair it. So once you've done that, copy that part. And now we need to wrap it inside of the assistant key based on what Vapi defined here. So if you're at the server URL link, you scroll down, you can see retrieving assistant. You basically need to provide the assistant inside of an assistant key. To do that, you can either copy that and just replace this whole part, or you can simply just write that inside of the JSON editor yourself, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So we have assistant, and then I literally just paste in what I have here. So, and that is already everything. So now I'm going to copy this whole part, head back into our integration. I head into the webhook response, and within the body, I just paste what I copied from before. So basically the whole assistant wrapped inside of the assistant key. Now I also need to define that this is actually a JSON response. So I activate the advanced settings, I go to custom headers, and in here I type content-type, and I'll set this to application/JSON, which defines that the response is a JSON string. Okay, now I can basically click OK, and that's already it. If I now activate this JSON, and I would basically call the number within the phone numbers, it would trigger the scenario. This scenario would return the assistant, and Vapi has now a completely dynamic assistant. So now imagine that if you're using a no-code tool like Make, you can literally just add anything in between here, like your CRM connection that can then fetch information from your CRM based on the phone number and adjust then the information right within here dynamically. So as you can see here with the first message, later you for example have values available, and then you can add something like the first name here, or you can even add the current date, etc. So let's say in the main prompt that you later on have in here, you can say something like the current time is, and then you would basically be able to use their time adjustments, which are here, to create a date and, to add a timestamp or whatsoever, or add now, which then again allows the assistant to have the current time available inside of the assistant prompt that you are then going to send back. This is the amazing power of Vapi, because it basically allows you to create those transient based assistants so that you can get something back that is completely dynamic depending on the call that is currently coming in. And this is just such a massively amazing feature, as you can literally just build whatever you would like to have on top of it. So you're not just bound by the predefined features of platforms like Make.com or Synthflow. Nope, you can literally just build whatever you would like on their infrastructure, which is great. So Vapi basically takes care of the whole handling of the voice AI agents in the backend, how to set them up, how they communicate with Twilio or Vonage, how the latency is. They basically optimize everything else around it so that you can literally focus on building a core product on top of it, or just integrate it into your own business or your own agency, or for your clients or whoever else you would like to. Obviously, there's a lot more to Vapi, which you can also read inside of their concept section of the documentation right here. So you basically have also a client SDK, which allows you to implement their voice calling into websites, so that you can basically even interact with websites through custom actions that you can then directly communicate with on your website. So obviously you need to have some specific setup for that. Maybe you want to use something like Express.js or Next.js, etc., where you can reload pages directly using JavaScript so that you can actually direct users through an assistant, etc. If you would like a nice example for that, you can check out the platform of Hume.ai. They have a really, really cool chatbot for that, or voice AI agent for that on the platform that can actually guide you through the website, which I think is incredible. So you can take a look at this. There are some more advanced features and also some predefined examples that you can look into. But what I just showed you is basically, I'd say, the main advantage of using Vapi over all the others, because you can literally just use the infrastructure. You're not limited to anything else. You can build